Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about some of the best and the worst things about living in Chicago. Now, I have lived in Chicago going on 5 years now. My partner and I moved here in August of 2020. It's been a while. It feels kind of strange that it has been that long. Like, I don't actually feel like I've lived here that long. But I have. For those of you who haven't watched my other videos, hi, I'm Danae. And the view outside of our apartment is Lake Michigan and Navy Pier, which is lovely. And so I was trying to set up the camera where you could see that in the background, but it didn't work. We have no windows up front, so like then I'm backlit, and with the ring light, like it just caused glare and it just didn't work. And I moved the camera around about 5 different locations, and then this is what we settled on. Fantastic. So you'll just have to deal with the background. I promise you, I do really live in Chicago. Then I just want to do a disclaimer. These are just my opinions. Please don't get mad. I'm sure everyone has different experiences living in the city. These are just mine and what I've found from the past 5 years here. So with that, let's get into the video. Have my things written down on my phone here. So I decided let's start with some of the worst things, end on a positive note, get the bad things out of the way. To be entirely honest, it was kind of hard for me to find true negatives that were specific to Chicago. I do enjoy living here for the most part, so yeah, it was kind of difficult. The number one negative thing about living here is definitely the cost. It's no secret, no surprise that Chicago, or really any big city, is going to be pretty expensive. One, for rent or parking, utilities, just basic stuff, but you also don't realize how much more expensive it is to do activities, go out to eat, really just any sort of other shopping, or if you want to rent something like a kayak or something down the river. Everything is just very, very expensive. And I kind of noticed it when I first moved here, but it's as to be expected. I don't think it necessarily shocked me. And the longer I've lived here, I've gotten used to the prices. Even groceries, that's another good one. Groceries are pretty expensive. And I'm from Wisconsin, so now when I go home and I buy things there, or I go out to a restaurant, I went out to a restaurant with my parents a couple months ago, and they were like, oh, it's a more expensive restaurant. And I remember seeing the bill, and I was like, this is just like a normal restaurant in Chicago. So I think it took me a while, but now I'm just kind of realizing how much more things are here. The next one is kind of a loaded point, but I put just transportation in general. So one, traffic is terrible. Again, as with any big city, it's gonna be pretty bad. And people are not nice drivers here. I get a lot of anxiety, especially if I have to drive downtown, because people aren't just rude. We do have a car here because my work location is actually quite far out of the city, so I would need to drive. And I pay $300 a month for parking, which is insane. It's definitely a lot. There are other options if you're interested in having a car here, but maybe you don't really use it frequently. We know some people who pay maybe $50 a month to park outside of the city, and then you take the train out to your car, take the car, and go wherever you'd like. But since I do use it so frequently for work, it's just that'd be a lot. So there definitely are options, but on the whole, parking is not necessarily easy. Most apartments don't come with a parking spot. We did live in an apartment once that was further north, far away from downtown, that did come with actually 2 parking spots, which is super rare. But most of the time, buildings either don't offer them, or if they do offer them, they're very, very expensive. Now, for the most part, if you're moving to Chicago, you're really just staying in Chicago, you work in Chicago, everything you need is here. You can take public transportation or walk depending on where you live. I would say it's a fairly walkable city. I mean, it takes a long time sometimes depending on where you live and, you know, where you're trying to get to, obvious stuff. But I will say I don't love the public transportation here. I have been to places where it was worse. So we will just say that. The buses are my favorite, mainly because they're cleaner. I think they're easier to figure out. That being said, they're not always on time. Most of the time they're late, in my experience. The train is also typically delayed, and for me, the train is just more stressful. There's always more people and more going on. You have to really pay attention to where you're getting off. Most of the bus stops are within a few blocks of each other, so if you miss your stop, you get off on the wrong stop, it's not the end of the world. Where the train stops are like so far from one another. If you're not directionally challenged like me, you probably won't have that issue, but it's just my experience. The next thing I wrote down is just lack of space in general. Everything is pretty close here. The apartments, the buildings, like everything's pretty just jam-packed, which is one of the reasons we chose to live in the location that we are, because I have buildings next to me, buildings behind me, but in front of us is just the lake, and it offers a lot more like space. The area that me and Dave, my partner, both grew up was very spacious. We had a lot of, I don't know how else to explain it, like a lot of space in our homes, in our streets, in our backyards, all of that, and you just don't have that as much in Chicago. When you get closer to the lake, when you get closer north, there's more opportunities. So where we are now, we even have a park that's right down, big green, open green space. And then there's like a free zoo. So there are options, but in general, if you're used to maybe more like small town living, you're not necessarily gonna get that same feeling here. Not to mention just in general, the apartments and stuff are smaller, but I've definitely learned how to adapt and to do with what we have. The next thing kind of weaves into that, but I put like lack of nature. I really like going outside and just like breathing in the fresh air, and I love hiking, doing really any outdoorsy activity. You can take a walk in Chicago, especially on the lakefront. It's beautiful. As I mentioned, they do have parks, which are nice. But as far as getting like that true feeling of being out in nature and going on hikes, like you don't really have that. Well, obviously you don't have that in Chicago, but even in other places of Illinois, you don't get it, like not the same way. And I know some of my Illinois friends are gonna come at me and be like, no, there's all these great like nature preserves and state parks. And there are. I've been to them. I enjoy them. But it's not the same. You can't really do a true hike in Illinois because it is so flat. It was funny because I remember Damick and I went to Starved Rock State Park, which is definitely beautiful. I would recommend going. But we had just gotten back from a trip from like Scotland or Tennessee, like Smoky Mountains maybe, or something like that. We're like used to doing these like intense hikes. We did like a 2-mile hike that was straight up, and it took us, you know, a good few hours. And I had planned this trip. I was like, let's go to Starved Rock State Park. And we looked at the hiking options, and I think there was like a 1-mile hike, a 2-mile hike, and a maybe 5-mile hike, something like that. And I was like, okay, let's start with the 2. Let's see, you know, how long it takes us, and then maybe if we have time, we could do like a different one. We completed the 2-mile hike in like 45 minutes, and that was with a lot of stops to just like take in the scenery. And then we proceeded to hike around the entire state park in a matter of like maybe 4 or 5 hours. Again, with like stopping and eating. And that's just because it was so flat. Like it didn't give the same feeling. It didn't give the same like struggle. I guess I like the struggle. I want to struggle through a hike. That's fun for me. The last thing I wrote is just dangerous, question mark, question mark, question mark. A lot of people, especially like my family or some of Damon's family, have this perception of Chicago being a very dangerous city. And I'm gonna be entirely honest with you, aside from maybe a couple times on the train, I have never really felt unsafe in this city. I do live in a really safe area, so that helps. I mean, area specific for sure. But especially downtown, there's never been a time where I've felt unsafe. All in all, people are pretty nice. Most people just mind their own business, so if you don't get involved in theirs, they won't get involved in yours. Even at night, like walking home, I've never had a time where I was like, oh, I really have to look out. I lived in Milwaukee for a couple of years because I went to university there, and I definitely felt more unsafe sometimes walking there than I ever have in Chicago. But again, area specific. So if you're planning on moving here or visiting, do your research, find the areas that are in general safer. And then at that point, it's just common sense. You know, use your street smarts, your city smarts, and you should be fine. So those were my list of some of the worst things or my least favorite things about living in Chicago. I'm gonna move on now to some of the best things. First and foremost, there's so many things that are close. So many activities, restaurants, that you have in such a small vicinity compared to where I grew up. I feel like I'm talking with my hands a lot. I hope that's not annoying. I'm a hand talker. I grew up in an area where most things you drive 10 to 15 minutes to get to anything, so not super far, but here, you can just walk down the street and have like 10 restaurant options to choose from. Where we are located, we have the lake, we have parks, we have, you know, rental stuff if you can afford it, museums, grocery stores, just everything. Like, it's crazy. I think about often when we're to move out of the city and if we move somewhere a little bit more rural, adjusting to that, because now I've gotten so used to being able to like order whatever food I want pretty much, or just go down the street and get something. Like, nothing is really like a big deal if you forget something at the grocery store or whatever. But I guess that's just the perk of living in any city, is having stuff close. Another thing is just the restaurants in general. Chicago has so many different cuisines, and even if you're looking at like the same cuisine, like me and Damon both love Italian food, but we've been to so many different Italian restaurants. Like, there could be a Sicilian restaurant and then a Ventinian restaurant. Ventinian? Is that how you say that? But I guess my point is there's just so many options and fun things to choose for. I personally love eating and trying new things, so that's something that I really value. The next thing I wrote is holidays. Chicago, man, they really go all out for our holidays. Recently we had St. Patrick's Day. You know, they dye the whole river green, have big festivals. I mean, it is insane. So many parades. Pretty much every holiday, no matter how obscure you think it is, Chicago will probably have some sort of parade and some sort of like bar crawl, anything to like get people out of the city. It'll happen. Especially in summer, if you go to the beaches on like Memorial Day or 4th of July, like, they'll be packed. Everyone will be playing music, and people bring like spike ball and different games. The city will have fireworks and live music, other just events all the time. Christmas is beautiful. Almost every building in the downtown area will put up Christmas lights. So it is definitely a fun place to be around the holiday time. We also have so many farmers markets in the summer and the fall times. I mean, we have 3 that take place within walking distance of our apartment. And summers in general here are just they're just wonderful. And of course, in the Christmas season, you have the German Christmas markets. They usually do a couple different locations and those are always fun. Another thing that I really love about living in Chicago, especially as someone who loves to travel, is being so close to like a big airport travel international hub thing. You can take so many flights out of O'Hare, a lot of straight through flights too, which I love. It's always a little bit of a hassle to get from downtown to the airport, but in general, like, it's nice to have that. The closest airport I grew up around was Milwaukee, and with a lot of flights you either have to get connecting flights or they don't fly a lot of like international locations, so having that big airport and being able to travel so easily is a huge plus for me. So those are all the things that I had on my list, some of the best and the worst things I think Chicago has to offer. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. Please put any questions you have about Chicago living in the comments and let me know if you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and perhaps I'll film like a part 2 segment of this if you thought it was helpful. Please hit that subscribe button below as well. I would really appreciate it, and I will see you all in another video. Bye.